They said Apache girl was too wild. Lonely rancher just gave her a horse. And watched her ride, the sun rose slowly over the dusty desert town, casting long shadows on the small weathered buildings that lined the main street. It was quiet, too quiet for a place that should have been alive with the sounds of children laughing and horses clattering over the dirt roads. Yet even in that quiet, one voice could be heard, sharp, lively, and full of laughter. It belonged to a girl everyone in town knew simply as the Wild Child. She was not a child in the ordinary sense. She was more like a spirit of the desert itself, untamed, free, and impossible to ignore. Her hair, dark and tangled from running through the brush and climbing trees, bounced as she darted across the open fields near her home. Her eyes shone with curiosity and fire, reflecting a life that refused to be contained by fences, rules, or expectations. From the moment she could walk, she had been a whirlwind of energy. Her parents often joked that she was born running, and in truth, she seemed to have no idea what it meant to slow down. She would race through the narrow streets of the reservation, chase lizards across sun-baked rocks, and climb the old, twisted oak trees that dotted the landscape. She laughed in the face of danger, often climbing higher than any child should, only to leap down with a grin that made the adults sigh in exasperation. People would shake their heads and whisper, "She's too wild. She can't be controlled." And the girl, of course, would smile, knowing she was listening but not caring a bit. Her family loved her dearly, but they also worried. Her father, a hard-working man who spent long hours tending cattle, often found himself exhausted just keeping up with her. Her mother, gentle and kind, would sometimes plead with her to stay closer to home, to play safely, or to rest. But the girl's spirit was relentless. No amount of coaxing could keep her still for long. She was happiest when she was outside, where the world was wide and open and the wind was free to whip through her hair. She had a bond with the land that went beyond understanding. She seemed to feel the rhythm of the desert in her bones. And perhaps most extraordinary, she had a connection with animals, particularly horses. The local ranchers had all noticed it. She would sit for hours at the edge of their fields, watching the horses graze and move with ease. She seemed to understand them in a way that no one else did. Sometimes she would approach a horse slowly, speaking in whispers that the adults could barely hear. The horses would watch her warily at first, but eventually many allowed her near, letting her stroke their noses or run her fingers through their manes. There was something in her energy that calmed the animals, something that drew them to her as naturally as the desert sun rose each morning. People said it was strange, even magical, that a child so wild could have such a gentle touch with creatures far larger and stronger than herself. Despite her love for the animals, the girl was often lonely. Her wildness, though admired in secret, also isolated her. Other children were hesitant to play with her because she was unpredictable. She might challenge them to a race through thorny bushes or dare them to climb a tree that was far too tall. She didn't mean to scare anyone, but her spirit was larger than theirs, and they couldn't keep up. The townspeople, too, admired her bravery from a distance, but were wary of it. "She's too much for this quiet town," they would murmur. They didn't understand that she wasn't dangerous. She was just alive in a way they had long forgotten. Her mornings often began at dawn, when the desert was cool and quiet. She would wake early, slip out of her small home, and run toward the hills before the sun was high enough to make the sand burn underfoot. Her parents would peek out the window, sighing in resignation, knowing she was already off on another adventure. Sometimes she would take her sketchbook and try to capture the shapes of the hills, the movement of the animals, or the patterns in the clouds. Her drawings were simple but full of life, just like her. The adults in town sometimes saw these sketches and marveled at the girl's attention to detail, though they still worried about her safety. One of her favorite places was a hidden canyon near the edge of town. The canyon was narrow and full of sharp rocks, but it had a small stream running through it and shade from the sun during the hottest hours of the day. She loved to climb along the edges, jump from rock to rock, and watch the world from above. From that vantage point, she could see the whole town, the surrounding fields, and even the distant mountains that marked the edge of the desert. Sitting there, she felt untouchable, free from rules and limits. She would often talk to the birds that flew overhead, imagining they were her friends and allies in the vast sky. Despite her adventurous nature, the girl was not reckless. She had a sense of instinct that guided her. She knew which rocks were safe to climb, which snakes were harmless, and how to find water when the stream ran low. It was as if the desert itself had trained her, shaping her into someone who could survive and thrive where others would struggle. Yet, even with all her skill and courage, there were moments when she stumbled or fell, scraping her knees or bruising her arms. And yet, even then, she would rise with a laugh, wipe the dirt from her clothes, and continue as if nothing had happened. Her resilience was remarkable, and it was this quality that made her stand out to those who noticed. In the evenings, the town would settle into quiet routines. Families would gather for dinner, and the girl would sometimes return home covered in dust, exhausted but exhilarated from her day's adventures. She would sit with her parents, eating quickly and talking a mile a minute about the things she had seen, the animals she had met, and the places she had discovered. Her parents listened patiently, their eyes full of love and concern. They knew she was different, that she would never fit into the mold of a quiet, obedient child. And they also knew, deep down, that her wildness was a gift as much as it was a challenge. The town, however, didn't always see it that way. They saw a girl who refused to be tamed, who challenged every expectation placed upon her. Some admired her courage in secret, while others worried she would never be safe. Her life was full of contradictions, joy and danger, freedom and loneliness, but she embraced all of it with a heart wide open. People whispered about her adventures, telling stories that grew taller with each retelling. They said she ran faster than the horses, climbed higher than the rooftops, and tamed animals no one else could approach. And though they whispered, the girl paid little attention. She was too busy living, too busy exploring, too busy being herself. Her connection with the horses, however, was always her greatest joy. There was a ranch at the edge of town where a few horses grazed freely, and the girl would spend hours there learning their habits, feeding them small treats, and observing their movements. Sometimes she would mimic their steps, trying to move as gracefully as they did. She had no formal training, yet her instincts were nearly flawless. The ranchers often watched from a distance, shaking their heads in disbelief. "She's too wild," they said. "She'll never be able to ride properly." But they could not deny the bond she had with the animals. It was real, tangible, and undeniable. Even on days when the wind was harsh or the sun blazed down, she persisted. She ran, climbed, sketched, and explored. She laughed at the world's rules, not because she didn't respect them, but because she had not yet found the ones that applied to her. Her spirit could not be contained, and though many tried to warn her, to guide her, or to slow her down, the girl always found a way to keep moving forward. She was a force of nature, a little whirlwind of energy and courage, living life on her own terms and leaving a mark on everyone who crossed her path. As the stars began to appear in the deep blue sky, the girl would finally slow down. She would sit outside her small home, listening to the night sounds of the desert, the whispering wind, the distant cry of an owl, the soft rustle of nocturnal creatures. She felt a deep sense of peace in those moments, a quiet connection to the vast world around her. And as she closed her eyes, dreaming of the next day's adventures, one thing was certain. The wild child of the desert was unstoppable, untamed, and ready for whatever life had to offer. The rancher lived quietly at the edge of the town, far from the bustle of the streets and the chatter of neighbors. His house was old, made of weathered wood, and surrounded by wide open fields where the wind moved freely over the grass. He had lived alone for many years. His children had grown and moved to the city, seeking opportunities he could never provide in the quiet town. His wife had passed away years ago, leaving him with memories that were as tender as they were painful. The rancher's days were long and solitary. He worked with the land and cared for his animals, but there was a loneliness in his life that nothing could fill. Despite the quiet, the rancher was a keen observer. He noticed things others did not: the subtle shift in the wind before a storm, the way a horse flicked its ears when it sensed danger, and the girl who lived in the town nearby. At first, he only saw her in passing, a flash of dark hair running across the fields, a laugh carried on the wind. But over time, he began to pay closer attention. He noticed how she approached the horses at the edge of his property. She was not afraid, but neither was she careless. There was a balance in her movements, a respect that he recognized immediately. She seemed to understand the animals in a way that went beyond training or experience. The rancher had seen many children grow up in the town, some timid, some curious, and some rebellious. But this girl was different. She had a spark, a wild energy that reminded him of the freedom of the plains, the beauty of living in harmony with the land. Yet there was something more. In her eyes, he saw courage and determination. She was unafraid to challenge herself, to explore, to take risks, and to dream. The townspeople often whispered about her, saying she was too wild, too untamed, too unpredictable. But the rancher saw beyond the rumors and the worries. He saw potential. For weeks he watched her from a distance. He observed her running through the fields, climbing the rocks, and carefully approaching the horses he had trained over the years. She would mimic the movements of the animals, stretching her arms like wings, shifting her weight as if learning to move like them. The rancher was impressed by her intuition. She was learning, observing, and growing, all without guidance, yet she seemed to absorb lessons from the land and the animals naturally.
He remembered a time in his own youth when he had felt that same connection with the world around him.
It had been years since he had seen such raw, untamed spirit in someone so young. One afternoon, the rancher decided to follow her path across the field, keeping a careful distance so she would not notice. He watched as she crouched beside a horse, speaking softly and stroking its mane. The animal, large and strong, lowered its head, allowing her to run her fingers along its neck. The rancher felt a warmth in his chest, a rare feeling he had not experienced in years. It was admiration, yes, but it was also hope. He wondered what could happen if the girl had a chance to ride, if she had guidance, if she had a companion in the form of her own horse. He began to think seriously about giving her that opportunity. Not everyone in town would approve. Many would see it as reckless, giving a wild girl such freedom. But the rancher knew better. He had spent decades working with horses, understanding their temperaments and personalities. He knew which animals were patient, which were gentle, and which could handle the spirit of a young, untamed child. He knew that a horse properly chosen could teach the girl lessons about patience, trust, and control. Lessons that might help her channel her wildness without diminishing it. The idea took root in his mind, and he could not shake it. He found himself thinking about the girl at odd times, imagining her riding freely across the fields, hair flying in the wind, eyes bright with excitement and joy. He thought about the pride she would feel, the confidence she would gain, and the bond she could form with a horse. It was not just about teaching her to ride. It was about recognizing her spirit, acknowledging her courage, and giving her a gift that no one else had dared to offer. The rancher also considered his own loneliness. He had lived years in quiet solitude, caring for his ranch and his animals, but lacking companionship or meaningful connection. Watching the girl, he felt a sense of purpose returning to his life. He could be more than a distant observer. He could guide her, teach her, and witness the transformation of her energy into something truly remarkable. He realized that helping her might also help him, bringing warmth and life back to a heart that had grown accustomed to silence. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, the rancher finally made his decision. He would approach the girl. He would offer her a horse. Not just any horse, but one carefully chosen to suit her spirit. He would trust her with the animal, and in return, she would show him a glimpse of the freedom and joy that he had long admired from afar. It was a bold move, one that might be misunderstood, but he no longer cared about the opinions of others. He knew the girl deserved a chance, and he was determined to provide it. The next morning he walked to the town, carrying a small gift for the girl, a token of his respect and trust. The girl, as always, was already running across the fields, her laughter echoing in the crisp morning air. She paused when she noticed him, curious but cautious. The rancher introduced himself, speaking in a calm, measured voice. He told her he had been watching her, had noticed her courage, her connection with animals, and her fearlessness. He spoke of a horse he had that he believed was perfect for her, gentle yet spirited, capable of matching her energy while teaching her balance and patience. The girl listened intently, eyes wide with surprise and excitement. No one had ever spoken to her like this before, with both understanding and trust. The rancher did not scold her for being wild, did not tell her to be quiet or obedient. He recognized her strength, her uniqueness, and her potential. His words were different from anything she had heard from adults in her life. They were filled with possibility, not judgment. She felt a spark of hope, a sense that someone truly saw her for who she was and believed in what she could become. Over the next few days, the rancher and the girl spent time together preparing for the arrival of her new companion. He introduced her to the horse he had selected, explaining its temperament, habits, and needs. She listened carefully, absorbing every word, eager to learn. The horse, a beautiful animal with deep, intelligent eyes, seemed to sense the girl's energy immediately. It lowered its head, allowing her to approach, and she stroked its neck with a reverence that impressed the rancher. He could see the bond forming even before they had begun to ride together. The town began to notice the unusual partnership. Whispers spread quickly. The lonely rancher, known for his quiet life, had chosen to mentor the wild girl. Some were skeptical, fearing that the girl's untamed spirit might lead to trouble. Others were curious, wondering how this unlikely duo would change the girl's life. But the rancher remained patient and steady, focused on the task at hand. He knew that trust could not be rushed, and that the girl's connection with the horse would grow naturally if given time and care. As days turned into weeks, the rancher continued to observe and guide the girl. He taught her how to approach the horse safely, how to read its movements, and how to communicate with gentle words and actions. The girl, in turn, absorbed everything with enthusiasm and curiosity. She was fearless, but she was also willing to learn. She discovered that patience was a form of strength, and that listening was as important as acting boldly. The rancher was amazed at her quick understanding and her natural ability to connect with the horse. It was as if she and the animal spoke a language only they could hear, a language of trust, respect, and freedom. Through this process, the rancher found himself changing as well. He had spent years in quiet solitude, but now his days were filled with purpose and warmth. He felt a sense of pride and joy he had not known in decades. Watching the girl's laughter, seeing her skill grow, and witnessing the bond between her and the horse reminded him of the beauty of life, the importance of trust, and the rewards of patience. It was a quiet transformation, one that unfolded in the golden light of morning and the soft shadows of evening. But it was profound. The girl, too, began to feel a new sense of confidence. She realized that her wildness, once seen as a problem, could be a strength when guided with care. She learned that freedom did not mean recklessness, and that courage was most powerful when paired with understanding. Her heart soared as she spent hours with the horse, learning, playing, and exploring. She felt a bond unlike any she had experienced, a partnership that combined strength, trust, and mutual respect. The rancher's gift was more than an animal. It was an opportunity for growth, for connection, and for self-discovery. And so, in the quiet town at the edge of the desert, a lonely rancher and a wild girl began a journey together. One would teach, one would learn, and both would discover the power of trust, courage, and the beauty of an untamed spirit, guided with care. The townspeople watched in wonder. The horses grazed peacefully in the fields, and the girl's laughter rang out once more, now joined by the soft, rhythmic steps of a horse who had found a companion as wild and fearless as herself. The morning sun spread golden light across the ranch, touching every blade of grass, every worn fence post, and every dusty corner of the fields. It was a day that felt full of promise, as if the world itself was holding its breath for something special. The girl stood at the edge of the ranch, eyes wide with curiosity and excitement, and a heart that raced faster than any horse she had ever seen. Today was the day the rancher had promised, a day she had been dreaming of, though she hadn't dared to imagine it fully. She would finally meet the horse that would become her companion, a creature chosen just for her. The rancher led her to a small paddock at the back of the ranch. The fence was sturdy, made of smooth wood, and inside stood a horse that seemed to glow in the morning light. It was a magnificent animal, tall, strong, yet with a gentle expression that immediately captured the girl's attention. Its coat was a warm chestnut color that shone like polished wood, and its eyes were dark and intelligent, holding a depth that seemed almost human. The girl's breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer. For a moment, she simply watched, feeling the weight of the gift before her. The rancher spoke softly, explaining that the horse had been chosen because of its temperament and spirit. "He's patient," the rancher said, "but he can match your energy. He will teach you, and he will trust you if you trust him." The girl listened carefully, nodding. She had spent months watching and learning, and now she understood that this was more than just a horse. This was a teacher, a partner, and a friend. She reached out tentatively, running her fingers along the horse's mane. The animal lowered its head, nudging her gently as if acknowledging her presence and welcoming her into its world. For the first few moments, the girl simply stroked and spoke to the horse, letting the connection form naturally. She whispered softly, telling the animal her name, sharing her excitement, and even confessing her fears. The horse seemed to listen, shifting its weight in a relaxed manner, ears flicking attentively. The rancher stood nearby, watching silently. He knew better than to rush this first meeting. Trust, he had learned, could not be forced. It had to grow, step by step, moment by moment. After a while, the rancher showed her how to approach the horse correctly, how to hold the lead rope, and how to move calmly around the animal. The girl absorbed everything eagerly, her mind sharp and her body ready. She was fearless, yes, but she also understood that patience was necessary. She waited for the horse to relax, to accept her, before attempting to guide it around the paddock. Each small step built her confidence and strengthened the bond between them. By the end of the morning, she was walking the horse around the paddock with ease, laughing as the animal nudged her playfully, testing her gently as if asking, "Are you ready for more?" As the days passed, the girl and her horse grew closer. She gave him a name, Shadow, and spent hours brushing, feeding, and speaking to him. The rancher taught her about grooming, saddle fitting, and the importance of patience. He showed her how to read Shadow's body language, how to notice when he was calm, nervous, or playful. The girl listened intently, eager to learn, but she also trusted her instincts. She found that she and Shadow understood each other in a way that went beyond words. A flick of an ear, a shift in weight, or a soft nicker became a conversation all their own. Riding was a new challenge. The rancher began with small steps, teaching her to sit properly in the saddle, to hold the reins lightly, and to communicate with subtle movements of her body. At first, Shadow was cautious, testing the girl gently, sensing her energy and responding accordingly. She wobbled and stumbled, sometimes losing her balance, but she never gave up. Each small success brought a sparkle to her eyes, a burst of laughter, and a renewed determination. She learned that mistakes were not failures, they were lessons. And Shadow, patient as ever, seemed to understand, never punishing, always guiding. The rancher watched quietly from the fence, pride swelling in his chest. He had seen many riders over the years, but none had the combination of courage, intuition, and heart that this girl possessed. Her wild spirit, once feared and criticized by the townspeople, was now becoming an asset. She could read the horse, respond to its movements, and anticipate its needs. The bond between them was growing stronger, a partnership built on trust, respect, and mutual understanding. The rancher realized that this was more than teaching someone to ride. It was helping a young spirit find her place in the world, to channel her energy and courage into something beautiful. Soon, the girl and Shadow moved beyond the paddock. The rancher led them to open fields where the grass swayed in the breeze and the sky stretched wide above. The first time she guided Shadow into the open space, her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The world seemed larger, more alive, and full of possibility. She whispered to Shadow, encouraging him forward, and felt the powerful muscles beneath her respond to her guidance. For a moment she felt as if she was flying, her feet barely touching the stirrups, her hair whipping in the wind. Shadow responded to her energy, matching her courage with his strength. The townspeople began to notice the girl riding across the fields. At first, they were skeptical, whispering among themselves, "She's too wild," they said. "She won't last." But as days turned into weeks, their doubts began to fade. They saw her skill growing, her confidence shining, and her bond with Shadow deepening. The laughter that had once seemed reckless now seemed triumphant. The girl was learning not just to ride, but to lead, to communicate, and to move in harmony with a creature as strong and intelligent as herself. The rancher continued to guide her, always patient, always supportive. He taught her how to navigate uneven terrain, how to stay calm during sudden movements, and how to encourage Shadow with gentle commands. The girl was a quick learner, her energy matched by her determination. She discovered that the more she listened, the more Shadow responded. She realized that riding was not about controlling the horse. It was about partnership. And with Shadow, she had found a companion who accepted her wild spirit while guiding her toward mastery. The girl's confidence grew beyond the ranch. She began to explore new areas, riding along trails, through small streams, and across open meadows. Each ride was a new adventure, filled with excitement, discovery, and joy. She laughed freely, her voice ringing across the fields, a sound of pure happiness. The town began to admire her courage and skill, seeing a young girl who had once been feared and misunderstood become a symbol of determination and talent. Even those who had doubted her spirit began to recognize her strength, her dedication, and her remarkable bond with Shadow. In the evenings, the girl would return to the ranch, brushing Shadow, feeding him and speaking softly to him. She reflected on the lesson she had learned that day, the importance of patience, the value of trust, and the joy of partnership. She had discovered that wildness could be beautiful when paired with understanding, that courage could be guided without being restrained, and that freedom could coexist with responsibility. The rancher watched these moments with quiet pride, knowing that he had helped nurture a spirit that would continue to grow, fearless and strong, long after she left the fields of the ranch. Over time, their partnership became seamless. The girl and Shadow moved together as one, anticipating each other's movements, responding to each other's signals, and exploring the world with mutual respect and joy. The bond was undeniable, built on countless hours of learning, patience, and shared adventures. And in the quiet moments, when the sun dipped low and the desert grew still, the girl felt a sense of peace she had never known. She was wild, yes, but now she was guided, confident, and empowered. She had found a friend in Shadow, a mentor in the rancher, and a sense of purpose that filled her heart with pride and happiness. The rancher, once lonely and quiet, had found a renewed sense of purpose as well. Through guiding the girl, he rediscovered the joy of connection, the pride of teaching, and the beauty of witnessing a young spirit flourish. Their lives, once separate and solitary, had intertwined in a way that brought warmth, excitement, and hope to both. The ranch, once quiet and still, was now alive with laughter, movement, and the rhythmic sound of hooves on the earth. And so, with patience, trust, and the courage to embrace the unknown, the girl and her horse began a journey that would change both their lives forever. The rancher watched as she rode freely across the fields, wind in her hair, eyes shining with joy, and he knew that this was only the beginning. A wild spirit had found its wings, guided by wisdom and kindness, and the story of their bond had only just begun. Days turned into weeks, and the girl and Shadow grew closer with each passing moment. Their bond had moved beyond simple companionship. They were becoming a team, learning to move as one. Every morning she would wake before the sun, excitement buzzing in her chest. Shadow would be waiting patiently in the paddock, ears flicked toward her, eyes bright and alert. The girl had learned to sense his moods, understanding when he was playful, cautious, or curious. In return, Shadow seemed to anticipate her every movement, responding to her commands and subtle shifts with an almost magical precision. The rancher continued to guide her, but now his role was less about instruction and more about observation. He watched from a distance as the girl mounted Shadow with confidence, adjusting her posture and balancing with grace. Her hands held the reins loosely but firmly. Her legs moved in rhythm with the horse, and her gaze was steady, scanning the fields ahead. The rancher could see the transformation clearly. The wildness that once worried the townspeople had become a source of strength, a force that guided her courage and determination. She was still spirited, yes, but now she knew how to channel that energy. The girl's first true challenge came unexpectedly one morning. The wind had picked up, carrying dust across the fields, and the sky was streaked with dark clouds. Normally, such weather would make her hesitate, but she was eager to test her skills. Shadow sensed her determination and moved forward confidently, though he was aware of the gusts that rustled the tall grass. As they rode, The girl felt the first real sense of fear, not of falling, but of losing control. Shadow was strong and powerful, and the wind made every movement more unpredictable. Her heart raced, and for a moment she wondered if she could handle it. The rancher, standing at the edge of the field, called out encouraging words. "Remember, trust him and trust yourself," he shouted. The girl took a deep breath, feeling the rhythm of Shadow's steps beneath her. She focused on the connection they had built, recalling everything the rancher had taught her about calmness, balance, and communication. Slowly, steadily, she began to feel the harmony returning. Shadow responded to her shifts in weight, her gentle tugs on the reins, and her soft whispers. Together they moved through the gusts of wind, racing along the fields with controlled speed, learning to trust each other in the face of challenge. With each ride, the girl grew stronger, more skilled, and more confident. She discovered the subtle art of reading Shadow's movements, predicting his reactions, and guiding him without force. She learned that riding was not about dominance, but about partnership, about understanding and respecting the animal beneath her. Shadow, in turn, seemed to enjoy the challenge, responding to her energy and daring in ways that made her laugh aloud. They were learning from each other, growing together, and creating a rhythm that was entirely their own. The town began to take notice. People who had once doubted her courage and skill now paused to watch as she rode effortlessly across the fields. Some whispered in admiration, while others simply shook their heads in disbelief. The girl, however, paid little attention to the onlookers. Her focus was on Shadow, on the wind in her hair, and on the freedom she felt when riding. Each ride was a lesson in patience, courage, and communication. She learned to stay calm when Shadow spooked at a sudden noise, to encourage him gently when he hesitated, and to celebrate even the smallest victories with laughter and joy. One afternoon, the rancher decided it was time to test her abilities in a new way. He led her to a narrow trail that wound through a canyon filled with twists, turns, and uneven ground. "This will challenge you," he said, "but I know you can handle it." The girl's heart skipped a beat with excitement. The trail was more difficult than anything she had faced before, but she trusted Shadow and herself. She guided him carefully, adjusting her weight to maintain balance as they navigated rocks, roots, and slopes. Shadow moved steadily, his steps confident, responding to every signal she gave. Together they made their way through the canyon, a seamless partnership of courage and skill. The girl began to notice changes within herself as well. She was still the spirited, fearless child who loved adventure, but now she carried a quiet confidence. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. She understood that freedom was most rewarding when combined with responsibility, and she realized that her wildness, once seen as a problem, was a gift, a strength that allowed her to connect deeply with Shadow and to explore the world in ways others could not. The rancher watched these rides with a growing sense of pride. He had spent years alone, guiding horses and maintaining the ranch, but never had he witnessed a bond like this. The girl's determination, courage, and heart had transformed the relationship between horse and rider into something extraordinary. He felt a deep satisfaction knowing that he had helped nurture her growth, yet he also understood that the lessons she learned were truly her own. Every ride, every challenge, and every small victory belonged to her. As the days passed, the girl began to explore even further. She rode along the streams that cut through the fields, feeling the cool water splash beneath Shadow's hooves. She navigated gentle hills and open meadows, learning to balance speed with control, excitement with caution. She experimented with tricks, guiding Shadow to step over fallen logs, circle around trees, and even jump small obstacles. Each success brought laughter and delight, reinforcing the bond she had formed. Shadow seemed to respond to her energy and creativity, often surprising her with his own intelligence and adaptability. The rancher noticed the girl's growing independence and knew it was time to allow her more freedom. He encouraged her to plan her rides, to choose routes, and to challenge herself without his constant guidance. This new responsibility thrilled her. She felt trusted, respected, and empowered. She carefully considered her choices, remembering everything the rancher had taught her, and she approached each ride with a mixture of excitement and thoughtfulness. Shadow followed her lead, responding with precision and trust. Their partnership had matured, becoming a dance of energy, understanding, and mutual respect. Even in quiet moments, the girl learned valuable lessons. She'd groomed Shadow meticulously, noticing the subtle changes in his behavior, the tension in his muscles, or the flick of his ears. She spoke to him softly, observing his reactions and adjusting her tone. She learned that patience was not passive but active, requiring awareness, empathy, and practice. Shadow, in return, responded with calmness and attentiveness, rewarding her efforts with trust and cooperation. Together they had created a rhythm, a language that only they could understand. The townspeople, once skeptical, began to see the girl in a new light. Children who had been hesitant to play with her now watched in awe, learning from her example of courage, determination, and connection with nature. Adults whispered about her skill, noting how a child once considered too wild could ride so gracefully, handle challenges with composure, and form such a deep bond with an animal. The girl did not seek attention or praise, but she noticed the change in how people regarded her. She realized that her wildness, when combined with patience and care, could inspire others and change perceptions. The rancher, observing quietly from his porch, felt a sense of fulfillment he had not known in years. Guiding the girl had been more than teaching her to ride. It had been an opportunity to share wisdom, to witness growth, and to reconnect with the joy of life. He admired her courage, her curiosity, and her respect for Shadow. And he understood that the lessons she learned, trust, patience, balance, and partnership, would extend far beyond the ranch, shaping her character and spirit in ways that would last a lifetime. By the end of the week, the girl had reached a new level of skill. She could ride confidently across the fields, through streams, and over small obstacles. Shadow moved with grace, responding seamlessly to her commands and subtle shifts in energy. The girl laughed freely, her voice ringing across the open plains, a sound of joy and freedom. She had discovered that wildness was not something to be tamed, but something to be understood, respected, and directed with care. Her spirit, once seen as unruly, had become a source of strength and inspiration. As the sun set on the ranch, casting golden light across the fields, the girl dismounted and stood beside Shadow. She patted his neck, speaking softly, and felt a sense of pride and connection that was deeper than she had ever known. The rancher joined them, smiling quietly, his eyes full of warmth and admiration. He had seen her transformation, her courage, and her bond with Shadow, and he knew that this was only the beginning. The girl had learned to ride not just with skill, but with heart, trust, and understanding. She had embraced her wildness, channeling it into something beautiful and powerful. And in that quiet moment, the girl realized that she and Shadow had become partners in every sense. Together they had faced challenges, discovered new strengths, and learned the meaning of trust. They had grown not just as rider and horse, but as friends, allies, and companions. The rancher, watching from nearby, felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that he had helped guide her journey. And the girl, full of confidence, joy, and freedom, knew that her adventures were just beginning, with Shadow by her side and the open plains ahead. The day had finally arrived. The air was crisp and clear, the sky painted in shades of pink and orange as the sun began to rise over the horizon. The fields stretched wide, golden and green under the soft morning light. It was a perfect day for riding, a day that felt almost magical. The girl stood beside Shadow, her heart pounding with excitement and anticipation. She had spent months learning, practicing, and growing, and today she would show the world the result of all her hard work. This ride would not just be another adventure. It would be a moment that changed how everyone saw her. Shadow nuzzled her gently, sensing her excitement and determination. The girl stroked his mane, whispering encouragement, and took a deep breath. The rancher stood nearby, watching quietly, his eyes full of pride and a little bit of nervousness. He knew how much this moment meant to her. It was more than just riding. It was a celebration of courage, trust, and the bond she had formed with Shadow. He had guided her, yes, but it was her strength, her spirit, and her heart that had brought them both to this day. The townspeople had gathered at the edge of the field. They had heard whispers about the girl's growing skill and her partnership with Shadow. Some came out of curiosity, others out of skepticism, wondering if the stories they had heard were true. But now, as they watched the girl mount Shadow with confidence and poise, their doubts began to fade. She moved with grace, adjusting her balance effortlessly, her hands guiding the reins with gentle authority. Shadow responded instantly, a perfect extension of her energy and will. The girl led Shadow into the open fields, their steps synchronized, their movements flowing like water. The wind caught her hair, tossing it around her shoulders, and she laughed aloud, the sound pure and free. Shadow responded to her joy, prancing lightly and moving with energy that matched hers. Together they galloped across the fields, moving faster and faster, yet always in control. The townspeople watched in awe. Some whispered to each other, pointing and smiling, while others simply stood in silence, unable to believe the sight before them. For the girl, the ride was more than just a display of skill. It was a celebration of everything she had learned, the trust she had built with Shadow, the lessons in patience and balance, the courage to face fear, and the joy of freedom. Each movement was intentional, each command gentle but firm, each step a testament to the bond between horse and rider. She felt the power of the wind, the strength of Shadow beneath her, and the rhythm of the land itself. For the first time, she truly understood the beauty of harmony, the joy of mastery, and the thrill of freedom. The rancher watched closely, a smile playing on his lips. He remembered the first time he had seen her running across the fields, wild and untamed, and the long days they had spent teaching, guiding, and bonding with Shadow. The transformation was remarkable. The girl who had once been considered uncontrollable had become a confident, skilled, and fearless rider. Her spirit was still as bright and lively as ever, but now it was balanced with knowledge, patience, and trust. The rancher felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing he had played a part in helping her discover her potential. As the ride continued, the girl began to attempt small jumps, guiding Shadow over logs and low fences with precision and confidence. Shadow moved smoothly, trusting her completely, and she felt an exhilaration unlike anything she had ever experienced. Each successful jump was met with laughter and joy, a celebration of achievement that echoed across the fields. The townspeople's astonishment grew with every leap. They could not deny her talent, her courage, and the extraordinary connection between her and Shadow. The girl guided Shadow to a hill overlooking the town. From this vantage point, she could see the streets, the rooftops, and even the small school where she had learned to read and write. She felt a wave of pride and happiness. She had accomplished something remarkable, not just for herself, but for everyone who had doubted her. Her laughter rang out across the fields as she turned Shadow in wide circles, feeling the full extent of her freedom. The wind whipped past her face, and she felt as if she were flying, soaring above the worries and limitations that had once surrounded her. The townspeople began to cheer, clapping and shouting words of encouragement. Some of the older adults wiped tears from their eyes, moved by the sight of the wild girl riding with such skill, grace, and confidence. They had once worried for her safety, doubted her abilities, and whispered that she was too wild to succeed. But now their hearts were filled with admiration. They saw not just a skilled rider, but a young girl who had grown into her spirit, embraced her courage, and formed a bond that was extraordinary. The girl's parents watched with pride, their eyes shining with tears. They remembered the days when she had run wildly through the fields, climbing trees and exploring the desert with reckless abandon. They had worried, yes, but now they saw how far she had come. Their wild child had grown, guided by patience, trust, and love, into someone who could face challenges, embrace freedom responsibly, and inspire those around her. The bond between her and Shadow was more than just horse and rider. It was a symbol of growth, courage, and possibility. The rancher stepped forward, walking quietly to the edge of the field. He watched the girl as she guided Shadow down a narrow path between two hills, her movements smooth, her commands clear, her spirit fearless. He knew that this was the culmination of months of effort, learning, and trust. And he also knew that this ride was more than a display. It was a message. It was proof that wild spirits could be guided without being tamed, that courage could be nurtured, and that trust could create something truly extraordinary. The girl guided Shadow back to the center of the field, slowing to a trot and then a gentle walk. She patted Shadow's neck, whispering words of gratitude and love. Shadow nuzzled her shoulder, as if acknowledging her achievements and celebrating with her. The rancher joined them, smiling warmly. "You've done something remarkable," he said softly. "You've shown everyone the strength of your spirit, the courage of your heart, and the beauty of your partnership with Shadow. I am proud of you." The girl looked around at the townspeople, the rancher, her parents, and Shadow. She felt a deep sense of accomplishment and belonging. She had proven not only her skill but also her character. Her wildness, once feared and criticized, had become her greatest strength. She had learned to channel it with patience, trust, and understanding. She had embraced freedom without recklessness and courage without fear. And in doing so, she had inspired everyone who had once doubted her. The townspeople slowly approached, offering words of congratulations and admiration. Children who had once been afraid to play with her now wanted to learn from her, to ride with her, and to experience the joy she had found. Adults who had doubted her whispered apologies and praise. And the girl, standing tall beside Shadow, felt a sense of pride that was quiet but powerful. She realized that her journey was not just about riding, but about growth, trust, and the discovery of her own strength. The rancher watched quietly, a warm feeling spreading through his chest. Guiding the girl had been one of the most rewarding experiences of his life. He had watched her grow, learn, and transform. He had seen the wild child become a confident, skilled, and courageous young rider. And he knew that her story was just beginning. The lessons she had learned, the importance of trust, patience, and partnership, would guide her for the rest of her life. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the fields, the girl dismounted Shadow and stood beside him, taking in the beauty of the world around her. She felt a deep sense of peace, freedom, and accomplishment. She had faced challenges, embraced her spirit, and discovered the power of trust and partnership. And she knew that no matter what lay ahead, she would carry these lessons with her always. Shadow nuzzled her once more, and she laughed, hugging his strong neck. The rancher approached, smiling warmly. "You've done more than ride today," he said softly. "You've shown everyone that wild spirits are meant to be understood, guided, and celebrated. You've changed the way people see the world, and yourself." The girl smiled, feeling a wave of happiness, pride, and gratitude. She had found freedom, courage, and friendship. She had discovered that her wildness was a gift, one that, when guided with care and trust, could create something truly extraordinary. And as she walked across the fields beside Shadow, the townspeople watching in admiration, she knew that her journey had only just begun. The wild girl of the desert had ridden into their hearts, leaving a mark of inspiration, courage, and hope that would be remembered for years to come.